Welcome to the Empower Hour, guys. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino, and I'm here with my dad, Jon Scarpino. He was here, I want to say a couple episodes ago, and we talked about his background and who he is and what he does. And today we'll brush up on that a little bit, but we'll also mostly be talking about macronutrients, which are your proteins, your carbohydrates, and your fats. So those are the core nutrients in your diet. So we're going to be talking about that. So, Dad, introduce us to who you are, just because not everybody may have watched the first episode that you were in.
Right.
That you did.
My name is Jon Scarpino. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, subspecialty trained in the treatment of spinal disorders and chronic pain management. As well, I have an extensive background in sports medicine. I worked at the Olympic Training Center and with gifted athletes in many different sports over the years.
Ta-da, and he's my dad. Don't we look alike?
Don't think so.
I'm much prettier. Anyways, so what are proteins? What are fats? What are carbohydrates?
Okay. Proteins are a basic building block of our body. They form the skeleton. They form the basis of your skeleton. That the calcium is laid down, and they're the basis for all your ligaments and tendons and for the muscular structures of your body, as well as your hair and fingernails. Those are all made of protein, so it's your basic building block. Fats.
But first, wait, let me ask this question.
Okay.
Because then proteins are made up of what else? Amino acids, right?
Amino acids, correct.
And where do you get those amino acids from? Because there's 24 amino acids, correct?
Correct.
And not all of those amino acids are found naturally in your body. You have to get them from different sources.
Most amino acids you can synthesize in your body yourself, actually.
Okay.
But there are a few called essential amino acids that you can't synthesize, that we've lost the ability to synthesize. So you have to get those from an outside source in order to have complete protein that you can utilize.
So what would an outside source be?
Good outside sources would be things like eggs, meat, soy protein, but that's not a particularly good protein.
Why don't you think? Because there's protein from animals.
Correct.
And then there's vegetarian type of proteins.
Correct.
Where you can do a complete protein with like rice and beans.
Correct.
What one do you think is better?
I think eggs are probably the best. Egg protein is really complete. Meat protein is probably second if it's the right kind of meat, again.
What would the right kind of meat be?
Grass-fed beef or pasture-raised lamb or...
And why is that?
Well, then we're going to start talking more about fats, too.
We'll still talk about that still, because that's important. Why?
Okay.
Because I understand it, but other people may not necessarily understand that.
The fat in meat is saturated fat. There's also a proportion of fatty acids that aren't. And the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s is very different in grass-fed beef. It's more ideal where there are more omega-3s than there are omega-6s. Omega-6s are pro-inflammatory, omega-3s are not.
And pro-inflammatory
means that those fats are ones that can be involved in the cascade of developing inflammatory things inside your body.
Okay.
So you want omega-3s because those are really important in your cell membrane so your cells function normally. And in grass-fed beef, the omega-3s are much higher. And that's one of the theories about why people think meat is bad at this point in time. Because if you look at meat that's grown on commercial food and grains, the omega-6s are very, very high, and some people think that contributes to inflammation and to cardiovascular disease, whereas if you eat grass-fed with the different fatty composition, it's much better for you and not so pro-inflammatory.
So does it turn out that way because of the grass versus oats?
Turns out that way because of the grass, correct.
And because cows can't process oats, or?
Well, they can process them, but their system is not meant to really digest them. So they do tend to get ill if they eat a lot of grains. And so you end up with animals that have to be given antibiotics and other things as well. But it does fatten them up a lot, but it's not the right kind of fat.
Got it. So you are getting a denser piece of meat, but maybe not full of the nutrients that your body adequately needs.
If you eat not grass-fed beef.
Right,
yes.
correct.
Yes.
Okay. So why egg protein then?
It's just a complete protein, and it works very well. Whey protein works well too.
But whey protein, for some people, whey is different than casein too, but whey is, I don't even know what whey is. It's a dairy protein.
Whey is a protein that comes from milk. Yeah, right.
So a lot of people that do protein shakes, you may have a casein or a whey protein shake. Those are usually the normal ones. For some people that are dairy intolerant, that's like me. I don't do well with whey. I tend to really bloat up, and it's not a very comfortable feeling, so I avoid whey.
Yeah, whey is a good protein source. It's quick protein. You use it right away. It doesn't last in your system for a long period of time, and it also spikes your insulin.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's one. Whey is very commonly used after training because you want a protein source that's readily available right away that you're going to use to restock your muscles, and also you want to push sugar into the muscle. So if you spike your insulin at that point in time, that helps sugars get into your cell as well.
Okay, and then versus a casein protein protein powder.
Casein is another milk protein. It lasts much longer in your system, and most of the proteins that say they work for 12 hours will be a combination of a short-acting protein like whey and then a longer-acting protein like casein, which will keep your amino acid level in your blood up for a much longer period of time.
So then a casein protein is better maybe throughout the day, like not necessarily after training or before training?
Or at night before you go to bed, where you want to keep amino acid levels up while you recover, your body rebuilds itself over a 12-hour period.
And then the whey is good for before or after?
Training.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And then soy proteins.
Not as complete a protein, not as good a protein. And there are different opinions about that. That's my personal opinion.
There's so many different opinions about it.
I don't think that soy is a particularly good protein.
And then some people, when I used to be a raw vegan, everybody would say, the argument was, oh, well, you don't really know what percentage of meat you digest in your system and how much protein you're really getting from it. And when you're cooking the meat, you're changing the makeup of the meat, so who knows if you're really getting that amount of protein that you think you are. And then the other contradicting factor that a lot of vegetarians and vegans say is that when you originally, like when a lion, or we'll go with a lion, they kill their prey and they eat it, they eat that zebra or gazelle or whatever in entirety. So they eat it with the blood and the organs and everything, and then they lay down and they digest that. But the way that they eat that helps their digestion and helps them absorb the nutrients from what they're eating and the protein, right? I'm saying that right?
Yeah, but you can't really compare a lion and a person because their digestive tracts are so different. I mean, we're designed to be omnivores. We have, a stomach where we can digest carbohydrates, proteins, fats. We have a long intestine where they can be absorbed, whereas the animals like a lion have a much shorter intestinal tract in order to absorb the nutrients more quickly than we do. So the two kind of digestive tracts
so
really
doesn't really go hand in hand.
They're really not that comparable.
Oh, well, my theory just got debunked.
Because we're
debunked by my dad.
It's just different,
Yeah.
the way it works.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because our makeups are different, our
Right.
genes are different.
And they're not designed to eat any kinds of grass or grains or things like that, where we're designed where we can live on almost anything that's around. I mean, if we only had fat, we can be like the Eskimos and live on a diet of only, fat and protein. If we are someplace where they just have grains, we can live on grains. If we're, Maasai warriors living in Africa, we can live on the blood and blood and the milk from cows. So we have a digestive system that really allows us, even though what we're eating may not be the ideal thing for us, it lets us live on almost anything.
But that's probably why we've evolved as a species too.
Yeah, because we can live almost anywhere and on anything that's available. We have that kind of a digestive tract.
So we've kind of exhausted proteins. You think we hit all the bases?
Pretty much.
Okay,
yeah.
so carbohydrates?
Carbohydrates are really an energy source for the most part. And we use carbohydrates to fuel our body and for repair purposes and for energy to run the systems that we have.
And it's a direct energy source for your brain.
Direct energy source for your brain, correct. Although you can run your brain on ketones too.
But we're not
fats.
talking about
Okay.
that. Don't confuse people, Dad.
Okay.
So what else about carbohydrates? Why else are they important?
Well, I mean, they're important as an energy source. You need carbohydrates, otherwise you have
don't work correctly.
You don't run correctly. You know, I mean, you can run without them, but you're better running with them. I mean, I think the important thing is what kind of carbohydrates you're consuming, whether you're consuming
Donuts and sugared cereal and...
all the good stuff. It's not particularly good for you.
No, because a lot of people talk about carbohydrates and they'll say like, oh, I don't eat any carbs. And I'm like, oh, wow, you don't eat any carbs? But then they're meaning like processed carbs, not, fruits and vegetables and whole grains, which those are all still carbohydrates. They're just healthy carbohydrates.
High percentage of carbohydrates, yeah. I mean, if you eat simple sugars, they go into your bloodstream right away, and you get a real spike in your blood sugar, and your body responds to that with a big surge of insulin to try and store the sugar away to get it out of the bloodstream. And so what happens is you crash. Your blood sugar goes down below normal, and then you're hungry again in 2 hours. And so you go on this yo-yo where you're, eating and feel satisfied for a little while, then you crash and you're hungry and you eat again. And so you consume a lot of calories in excess. And when you filled your muscle up with as much carbohydrate as it can handle, and you still have extra carbohydrate, that's when you store it as fat.
So give an example of that. Would that be eating too much in one meal? Or would that be...
It would be eating too much at one time. In other words, if you've fueled everything up, all your muscles are fueled up to the top, and there's still a lot of carbohydrates left over, then you're going to store those carbohydrates as fat. So and that's one of the theories behind eating 6, 7, 8 meals a day compared to a couple of big meals a day. Because if you eat a big meal a day and you get a huge overload of carbohydrates, then you're going to store those as fat. If you eat the same number of calories throughout the day in smaller meals, you'll never have the same kind of an excess, and you'll use the carbohydrates.
And we're going to talk about different diets after we go over all the macronutrients, so that you can get a better idea of what kind of things are out there. And then we need to talk about fats. Fats. What everybody's always scared of, and fats aren't the things that you should be scared of, in my opinion. I think you should be worried about sugar, because sugar is the thing that really sets you up for failure, but fats are really important.
Fats are they're good and they're bad. I mean, it depends on the kind of fats and depends on where they came from. In a lot of animals, toxins are stored in the fat. So if you
that's like humans too. Like marijuana is stored in your abdominal fat.
If you eat an animal that has not been fed well and has a lot of toxins, you're going to pick up all those toxins from the animal when you eat it. So that's another reason to look at things that are grown naturally and that are grass-fed.
Free range.
Yeah, exactly. But fat is very important in a number of ways. I mean, fat is an insulator for your body. We don't need that so much here in Hawaii, but if you're an Eskimo or you live someplace where it's cold, you want to have a layer of insulation. There's also the regular white fat, and then there's what's called brown fat, and brown fat is very hypermetabolic, and in colder climates, it's a source that develops heat and helps to keep you warm as well. Fat also makes up the majority of your brain. It's the coating on a large number of your nerves where they conduct
Your neurons.
where they conduct electricity. So you have to have fats in your body. Also, your cell membranes around each cell in your body are made up predominantly of fat as well, and that's the barrier through which nutrients go into your cell and waste products come out of your cell. So you have to have enough fat. I mean, the idea.
Before we get into it really deeply, we're going to take a short break.
Okay.
And then we'll be right back. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino. I'm here with my dad, Jon Scarpino. We'll be right back to talk more about fats.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
Welcome back to the Empower Hour, guys. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino. I'm here with my dad, Jon Scarpino. This is the second time on the show, and we were just talking about macronutrients, and we're currently talking about fats, and he was diving into it. And I was even getting a little bit lost, so can you recap on where we were? We talked about white fat and dark fat, light fat
and brown fat.
There we go.
Yeah. I was going to say that fat kind of started to get its bad reputation with Ansel Keys.
Who's that?
Who I had the pleasure of working with at the University of Minnesota when I was there. He was
kind of shows you my dad's age.
He was
just joking.
He was a teacher there, and he was the gentleman that came up with the theory of cholesterol being absolutely terrible for you and being a precursor to heart disease. And that theory has been, to some extent, debunked at this point in time because you need cholesterol. I mean, we went for a long time on this crusade where you weren't supposed to eat any saturated fats and you shouldn't eat butter at all, and you should eat polyunsaturated fats that were hydrogenated into margarine, which contain all kinds of trans fats, which are terrible for you. And some of Dr. Key's original data was sort of flawed. So that theory...
Flawed in what way? It was...
Sort of things had been neglected.
Okay.
As that didn't go along with the theory.
Okay.
But anyway, so cholesterol got a really bad rap. It still can be a problem if you have too much cholesterol. The thing that people need to understand is your body can make its own. So you can completely eliminate cholesterol, and if you're genetically inclined, you're still going to make a lot of cholesterol.
So what does that mean for somebody that has high cholesterol and they need to get their cholesterol down? What do they do?
You do it partly by diet, and then you may need to resort to other drugs, vitamins, or other substances to help regulate your cholesterol.
And just because I like to play devil's advocate and know a lot of details about things, what happens if this was like 50 years ago and you didn't have that option of drugs or pharmaceuticals or things to help you? What would happen?
You'd have a high cholesterol.
And then what would that mean?
Well,
because I mean, everybody talks about having high cholesterol, but I don't really even know what having high cholesterol means or what it does to you.
Well, I mean, number one, there's a bunch of different kinds of cholesterol. There's high-density lipoproteins, the high-density cholesterol, and then there are the lower-density ones. And the ones that are a problem are the smaller, lower-density lipoproteins that get oxidized. And when they become oxidized in your system, they produce inflammation within the blood vessels and scarring and deposits in the blood vessels that narrow them down, cause coronary artery disease.
And that makes it hard for blood to be transferred.
That makes it hard for blood to be transferred. But the high-density lipoproteins are important for transport in your system. And the other thing is that a great percentage of your hormones are made out of cholesterol. That's the basic ring structure for testosterone and a lot of your hormones. So if you don't have any cholesterol, you don't manufacture your hormones properly. So you do need cholesterol.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. So that's where your hormones come from.
So if you don't eat a lot of meat and you're not getting cholesterol from meat and your body doesn't genetically produce it, that's where you could get
Your body will still make some, but it may not make some people genetically make the kinds that are not good. And relating to me myself, that I've had heart problems, even though I supposedly had no risk factors for heart
Dad's
disease.
very healthy, and he does kettlebells, and he's super active and eats well, and he's had heart problems and
had a heart attack and bypass surgery,
very bad one.
and
Very stressful.
have a cholesterol of 150. But when you look at the way my cholesterol is made up, genetically I have one of the little kinds that's not so good for you. So I take a regimen of vitamins and medications and red rice yeast to keep that portion of the cholesterol down, to hopefully not have problems in the future.
What does red rice yeast do? We're totally off topic, but I'm just kind of
red
amazed
rice yeast prevents your liver from making cholesterol, reduces the amount of cholesterol that your liver makes, and it's the same as the lipid lowering drugs.
Lipids are fats.
Yeah, fats. The atorvastatin and the other medications that a doctor will give you to reduce your cholesterol works in the red rice yeast works in the same way. It's been used in traditional Chinese medicine and Asian medicine for thousands of years. And interestingly, one of the big drug companies got red rice yeast taken off of the market because it interfered with their patent. And then it eventually came back and went to court, and decision was made that the red rice yeast had been there long before the drug was patented, and therefore it didn't interfere with the patent, and again, they could produce it. So now you can buy it in the health food store.
And that will help lower or maintain your cholesterol.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like a natural way to do it.
Natural way to do it, right.
Oh, there you go, guys. A little tip, natural way to lower cholesterol, which I don't need
But
at
if
the
you're
moment.
going to do it, take CoQ10 at the same time.
Well, what's CoQ10?
CoQ10 is another natural substance that your body needs to function, and its production in the liver is inhibited by red rice yeast or by the lipid-lowering drugs as well. So if you're going to take one of them, you need to supplement CoQ10 as well.
And that's why it's so important to take. I know, like, as being young, like, sometimes I neglect my body or I don't pay as much attention to it as I should, but everything is in a balance, and if you don't pay attention to what's going on and you don't keep that balance and maintain it, you end up having to go on medications, and then one medication interrupts something else, and you have to take another medication to fix that. And so just what you're saying made me think about that.
Yeah.
So young people, please take care of your bodies. It's very important. Right, Dad?
Yes. No, I mean, living a healthy lifestyle with moderation in all things is the best way to do things.
Yeah. So we talked about omega-6s, omega-3s.
Right.
We kind of did. What?
Those are unsaturated fatty acids.
Omega-6s are found in nuts, correct? Like walnuts.
Yeah, omega-3s are too.
And then avocado would be?
Has omega-6s, omega-3s.
Salmon would be omega-3.
Salmon has a lot more omega-3s.
Okay, I'm just trying to give you guys some examples of foods, because you hear omega-6, omega-3, and it's just like, oh, what is that? So when you can hear foods, it kind of transfers over a little bit better.
Well, I mean, and then you talk about fats. You have saturated fats, and then you have unsaturated fats. And
so saturated fats is when it's at room temperature, it's a solid.
Yes.
So butter.
Butter it has saturated fats. And by saturated, it means that there's no place to oxidize it. There's no place to attach an oxygen. All the chemical sites are occupied. So that's a very stable kind of fat. The unsaturated are either monounsaturated or polyunsaturated. Omega-3s would be ones that are unsaturated at the third carbon in on the fatty acid chain.
Okay.
And omega-6s are unsaturated at the sixth spot on the chain.
So there's no carbon atom there.
Well, there's a carbon atom, but it's not completely saturated, so you could add an oxygen to that level, okay? Or other things to that level. The
You guys are getting
polyunsaturated,
a chemistry lesson
the
too.
polyunsaturated ones are ones that have multiple open spots where the fats can be oxidized. And those are better for you, but they also tend to turn rancid easily and can be oxidized in your body and cause inflammation as well. So the monounsaturated fats, for the most part, are probably better for you, like olive oil is a monounsaturated fat.
But then you hear people talking about when you heat olive oil really, really high, it
Yeah.
turns into almost like a
It'll oxidize.
paper-like
It'll-
substance, and why would you want that in your
It'll turn
body?
into trans fatty acids. I mean, you oxidize it. So you really shouldn't really heat any oil up to its smoking point. You've ruined it at that point in time. That's one of the problems with fried foods, is that the oil gets heated up too high. It's full of what are called trans fats, which are very, I guess a nice way to say it is that they're rigid, and your body will incorporate them into the cell membranes, and then the cell membrane doesn't work right because it has that fat in there that's not flexible, and so the cell can't move and it can't transport substances well. So that's the problem with frying things, is that there are all kinds of trans fats, and also with hydrogenating things, like when you hydrogenate the oils, you can make trans fats when you heat them up to hydrogenate them as well, like when you make margarine.
Okay.
So,
Hydrogenated, corn, no, I was going to say.
so when you want to make margarine, you're going to make it out of like a polyunsaturated fat, like you're going to make it out of soy oil or canola oil, things like that. And in order to make it not liquid, you have to add hydrogen ions. You have to
So that's why it's hydrogenated.
Hydrogenate. You have to sort of saturate it up so that it gets thicker. And in the process of doing that, you can make trans fats, which are not good for you. So it has to be very careful how that's made. I mean, people have been eating margarine for years instead of butter, and the reality is if it's not made the right way, it's worse for you than eating the butter was in the first place.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And butter, if it's from grass-fed cows, again, has very high omega-3s, and it's really not bad for you. And the saturated fat in butter, one of them is butyric acid, which is a fat that the good bacteria in your intestines just love to eat. And it's very healthy for your intestine to have butyric acid.
So then if somebody wanted more butyric acid,
butter is a good source of butyric acid.
But how much butter?
Again, it depends on what your whole diet is going to be.
You have to be specific. It can't be like It can't be like a cupful of butter. It's like a couple of tablespoons, right?
I can't be specific because it depends on what kind of a diet you're going to eat. If you're going to eat,
should we ease into diets?
If you're going to eat a high fat diet, you may be eating 50 to 70% of your calories on a daily basis from fat. And so for a man, you'd be eating 8 or 10 tablespoons of fat a day.
Right.
And in that case, you might eat several tablespoons of butter a day. If you're eating a low-fat or moderate fat diet, then obviously the amount of fat you would be eating would be much less.
And we'll be right back. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to talk more about fats and then various diets. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino, and I'm here with my dad, Jon Scarpino. And aren't you happy? The weekend's almost here. Woo-hoo! Okay, commercial break. We'll be back soon.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevelin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino, and I'm here with my dad, Jon Scarpino. We were just covering fats, and he was talking about how many tablespoons or of fat, butter, an average male would need. But we're going to talk more about different diets that are out there, different diets that are trending, different diets that you may have heard of. Because I know everybody always wonders, and there's pros and cons to everything, and it's all just kind of like what goes well with your life and what you can do and what you can tolerate and what you like.
I think you kind of have to try different diets and sort of see what works for you. You know, I think the one thing that doesn't work for anybody is lots of refined carbohydrates.
What are refined carbohydrates, Dad?
That's all the stuff that you like to buy at the grocery store that's not good for you.
Like
I mean, donuts,
pastries.
white bread, pastries, cake, processed foods, processed cereals that are very high in sugar content and low in nutrition. But from there, you can find a diet that emphasizes anything, and different diets seem to work better for different people. And you can find diet books looking at all things. I mean, Mediterranean diet is one that's in favor and one that's, you know, basically recommended by the American Heart Association, which is high in monounsaturated fats, olive oil, olives, with a lot of complex carbohydrates, seafood, a little bit of meat, and a lot of vegetables. Then you can go all the way to the other extreme with something like the Atkins diet, which was a very, very high-fat diet that people lost weight on, and actually worked well for a lot of people with diabetes who had very significant insulin resistance. But that diet didn't take into account at all the types of fat you were eating, and you just could sit down and eat 2 pounds of salami if you wanted to, or, you know, a pound of bacon. So
the Atkins diet is low-carb diet.
It was a very low-carb,
high protein.
Very low-carb, moderate protein, high fat kind of diet, right. I think a better one, if you want a high-fat diet, is the one that's currently being recommended by a gentleman named Dave Asprey, who's written a book recently called, I think it's the Bulletproof Diet. And it's a very high-fat diet, but very particular in the types of fat that you eat, only good fats.
And the reason why, just like jumping in right now, the reason why there are so many different diets is because, like we said originally, people's bodies work and they utilize things differently, and it's just finding what your body likes the most and what it's going to use the best. I know in bodybuilding, when we're cutting, some people are more carb sensitive, some people are more fat sensitive. So depending on what your body does, you'll get carbs or fats pulled to help you come down more, or, you know, to refill your muscles, or to make you look a certain way, because the body does really respond to those macronutrients differently for every single person, because all of our genetics are different, and our backgrounds are different. And
probably a lot of it has to do with what your ethnicity is, because if you lived in an area, let's say that you lived in Scandinavia, where greens and stuff are very rare in the wintertime, you know, for 10,000 years, you're going to do better on a diet that's higher in animal proteins and things that they had available to them. If you come from an environment where people didn't eat meat and survived on grains, you know, and some other vegetables, over 10,000 years, the people that genetically do well on that are going to be the ones that are selected out. So your genetics are going to predispose you to doing better on that kind of a diet. So I mean, if you look at bodybuilders, just like you were talking about, you can find examples of people that eat completely differently. Clarence Bass, who is my age now, who was an over 40 Mr. America, and who's maintained.
Is he the one, I was reading his book the other day?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I was reading, he had a diet plan in there, and it was like so carbohydrate heavy. I was like, oh my gosh, he had like a cup of oatmeal in the morning, and then 3 separate pieces of fruit, and then a cup of milk, and then he had his snack with a bunch of carbs, and his lunch was a huge sandwich. I was just like, oh my gosh. But his physique is amazing. I was just amazed.
And he's run a body fat of less than 5% for the last 40 years.
Which with that many carbohydrates, I don't even know.
Yeah, so, and then you take people like Bill Pearl, who won the Mr. Universe twice, who's a complete vegetarian, on the other end of the spectrum, you know, and then you have the more typical bodybuilder that eats moderate carbohydrates and a very high protein, you know, lower fat kind of diet with multiple meals per day, which is more kind of the traditional bodybuilding way. And when you get to the end, these guys all look amazing and great, but they've gotten there in a very different way with a different diet, just based on what their metabolism is and what works best for them.
And so basically the conclusion of that whole spiel was you got to try things out and see what works for you. I get a lot of people that ask me, like, when I'm cutting or, you know, I'm coming in and I'm looking good and they're like, oh, what are you doing? You know, I want to be on the same diet as you, but I mean, when I'm really low carb, that's not a diet that's going to sustain you for the rest of your life. It's not a good diet to be on all the time. And so it's really looking at what your goals are and what you want to achieve and what you can do over the long haul, and like we said, what your body can do, rather than just getting there quick.
I mean, I think the basic thing really is to eat foods in as close to their normal state as you can, to have lots of fruits and vegetables, to mix your vegetables up and eat more vegetables than fruit. I mean, because actually vegetables are better for you than fruit is, because fruit has a lot of fructose in it, and that's a whole nother topic, a different kind of sugar that doesn't raise your blood sugar, give you an insulin spike, but that can directly be metabolized to fatty acids.
And why is that? We can talk about that for a little bit. Why
Well,
is that
I mean,
bad?
Because you're going to get high triglycerides if you have too much fructose. That's one of the problems with things like high fructose corn syrup, is because those things will be converted to triglycerides, to fats, and again will raise your fats if you eat too much of them.
And that's not saying like don't eat an apple, but
No.
at the same time, some people who just base their diet around a lot of fruits, that's why you may not be seeing the results that you want, because you're getting all that fructose.
And you're getting just a lot of simple sugar.
I know that
too.
happened to me when I was a raw vegan. I would crave fruit all the time. I needed fast energy all the time. And I was running long distances. I would do motorless Mondays, and I would run 20 miles from Hawaii Kai to Argosy for a class, and then I would run back. So that's from Hawaii Kai to downtown, old downtown, and then back. So I would need a lot of energy fast, and I would always crave fruit. And then I noticed, I started gaining weight, and it was because of all the fructose.
Yeah. So again, it's moderation pretty much in everything, and eat the best quality food that you can afford to buy. Stay away from all the stuff that tastes so good.
What do you think about the Paleo diet? So pretty high fat,
That's
low carbs.
It's kind of like the Mediterranean diet in a lot of ways. I mean, what they're saying
But they're
is
not really vegetable dominant or fruit dominant.
But a lot of vegetables on the paleo diet. I mean, meat, vegetables.
It's kind of gotten
fat.
commercialized too, and it's kind of changed from what it was supposed to be to what it is right now.
I mean, it was supposed to be originally kind of a hunter-gatherer type of diet where you ate the things that your ancestors ate in their natural form. You ate meat, you ate, greens, you ate vegetables, you ate nuts, that kind of a diet. And that works very well for some people.
And then what else is there? There's Weight Watchers. That's kind of like a program diet.
Well, that's a program diet.
The problem that I have with Weight Watchers is that it doesn't really teach you anything about food or the nutritional value of your food or what you're eating. You can kind of set something in front of me and I can be like, oh, that has this many carbs, this many fats, or, wow, that bowl of rice kind of looks like 2 servings. When you start doing that regularly, you get to know what you're eating and you can recognize it. And I think when you're doing Weight Watchers, everything's pre-made and everything has its points. So you follow a point system, but you don't really know what you're eating or why you're eating it or
Yeah, and you can trade things. I mean, they've set up the science for you so that you have little units and you can have 2 units of this or 2 units of that.
Right, right.
So you can substitute this for that, but that doesn't,
It
that's
doesn't
just,
get rid of the bad eating.
that's based purely on calories, and it's not necessarily based on,
Well, it doesn't get rid of the bad eating
what's the
habits
best for
either.
you.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, I can trade my green salad that's 4 points for 1 serving of a cookie or whatever. I don't know how it
Yeah.
works because I've never been on it. But yeah, so that's, I'm sure there's some people that like that. That's just not
but
for
again,
me.
that works for
Some
some
people.
people that want to be, that need to be regimented and want a simple system that they just can have substitutions and they can,
Right.
you know, and that'll work. I mean, there's a ton of things out there that'll work for people. But the problem with all the diet type of things is when you're talking about not a way to eat for life, but a diet to get to a specific goal. If you look at what happens when people do that, they usually can't stick to it, and they'll lose a lot of weight, but then they'll just gain it again.
Yep.
And I think you got to be particularly careful about the diets that really restrict you to very low calorie.
Those are horrible, and I know for my first prep, I was very low calorie, and I will never do that again. It was miserable. I knew it probably wasn't the best way to when you're doing bodybuilding, you need to drop down for a show, so you need to get as thin as possible to show your physique. Is that a good way to explain it?
Yeah.
Not like
You want to get rid of all the
unhealthy.
fat,
Right.
and you want to just have your muscle
So you drop
definition.
carbs because carbs have a water molecule as well. Or some people, that's the way some people do it. That's the way I did it. For me, that was just horrible because I like to be very active. I do a lot. I go to school. I work full time. And it was just, my brain needs something to run on. And for me, life was just miserable for that amount of time. And I don't think that's worth it. I lift because I love it. And I like to do competitions because it's just like a side note of being able to lift and go like, hey, like I worked really hard for this. And so if I can't go in the gym and lift, what's the point of even doing it?
I think you brought up another point that fools a lot of people. You were talking about going on a low-calorie diet and losing weight that way. You talked about the water molecule. When you store sugar as glycogen. And what that is it's a long chain of glucose molecules all linked together. And for each glucose, there's 4 waters. So there's a lot of water with that. So when people go on a low carb diet, they're like, oh, this is great, I'm losing so much weight. What you're doing is you're burning off all the sugar that you've stored. You're not burning the fat off, you're burning all the sugar off, and then you're losing 4 molecules of water for every molecule of glucose that you get rid of. And so you lose a lot of water weight, and the minute you start eating again, you pick that 5 or 6 pounds right back up again.
And that happens.
And all these
in a
diets
show.
that guarantee you 5 pounds in a week, it's by losing all the
that water
glycogen
weight.
in the water. And you haven't really lost anything body composition-wise, you just pick it right back up again. So that's not a good way to do it. The other thing about low-calorie dieting is that if you look at people who diet with low calories, 75% of the weight that they'll lose will be muscle, and only 25% of it will be fat.
We don't want that.
And you have to recognize that when you want to lose weight, one of the best ways is to actually gain muscle, because
It increases your metabolism.
muscle is your furnace. You burn 90% of your calories in your muscle. So if you go on a diet where you lose a bunch of muscle, when you get all done, your furnace is littler.
Right.
So if you go back to even what would have been basic calories for you before with a littler furnace, you'll store it because you won't burn as much as you burned before. So it's a cycle where people, repeatedly diet, they continue to lose muscle, and even though they're skinny, their body fat is higher than it was before and their furnace is littler.
Wow. Dad has a lot of information for us, huh? Sometimes he loses me. But I'm glad he could come back on the show today. we're going to close out. You taught me so much again. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm your host, Maile Scarpino, and this is my dad, Jon Scarpino. And this was the Empower Hour, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one, guys.